After working for a number of other companies, young programmers Mike Koulis and Matt Toshlog decided that it was time to start their own gaming studio. Unfortunately, they were separated by half of America. Toshlog liked living in Boston, but it was an expensive city for a new company to be in. So as a short-term fix, they decided to start their company where Koulis was living, in Champaign, Illinois. The result was Parallax Software in 1993, and they quickly got to work on an ambitious combat flight game with an emphasis on fast-paced action rather than realism. It was originally called Inferno, but later changed its name to Descent. It was a tough production cycle. Their publisher, Apogee, lost faith in the project a couple months in, and the small Parallax team had to scramble to find a new publisher. Fortunately, Interplay liked their tech demo and agreed to release it. Descent defied its title by lifting its company with strong sales. But despite having a success right out of the gate, Parallax would split into two afterwards. And while one half floundered and was closed down soon after, the other is still going strong to this day, with both cult icons and commercial hits to its name. Still in Champaign after all these years, Volition now stands as one of THQ's flagship developers who have proven through a variety of genres, platforms, and trends that even a few stumbles can't stop a passionate team from finding success. After finishing up the original Descent, Parallax turned to making an expansion pack for it. Interplay took their expansion and instead released it as a full sequel, Descent 2. Parallax wasn't exactly happy about the idea, thinking it might make them look bad for charging full price for a half game. Nevertheless, Descent 2 was also a solid hit and didn't ding their reputation any. It would also be Parallax's swan song. Only 3 years old and only 2 games to their name, Parallax split into 2 separate entities. Toshlog had grown tired of Champaign and wanted to move on. Koulis wanted to stay put for just a little longer. So as a temporary measure, they each started their own studio, with the idea that the 2 ventures would be merged in the near future.
For personal reasons, we had split the company in half. He went to Ann Arbor and founded Outrage Entertainment, and I stayed in Champaign and formed Volition. It's pretty much a continuation of Parallax Software. You know, one day we were legally Parallax, the next day we were legally Volition. I sat in the same chair at the same desk, working on the same type of stuff. But just for because Matt went up to Ann Arbor, we wanted to split the company into 2 separate legal entities.
Toshlog founded Outrage Entertainment and immediately got to work on Descent 3. Koulis, meanwhile, started Volition Incorporated, and with it, a brand new franchise. Descent had featured full 6-axis freedom of movement, but had been limited to interior spaces. Now, Volition wanted to head out into open space, to have epic fighter battles in grand science fiction tradition. The game would be called Free Space: The Great War. Except, it wouldn't. It turned out that there was a hard drive cleanup tool called Free Space, and they didn't want another piece of software with the same name, even if that software in no way competed with their utility.
We were honestly not terribly happy with the publisher for not fighting that legal battle on our behalf. We thought, come on, Free Space the game, Free Space the hard drive utility, certainly we can both coexist. So they wanted to put Descent in front of it, so it's Descent: Free Space: The Great War, which is a really long title. And then it turns out they didn't like that title in Europe, at least in the UK. So in the UK it became Conflict: Free Space: The Great War.
The mouthful, Descent: Free Space: The Great War, released in 1998, and despite its bulky title, was considered a first-rate space combat simulator. Since Volition and Parallax before it had been founded by programmers, it was no surprise that Free Space was a technical marvel, featuring gorgeous graphics and effectively infinite depth. Fleshed out with top-notch gameplay, the game sold great and established Volition as a serious developer, both among the fan community and publishers. If it had a flaw, it was that the multiplayer suffered badly from lag. Volition had made sure their single-player component was as great as possible, but didn't realize until too late how different the multiplayer experience would be. But Volition wasn't about to rest easy. Immediately after completing Descent: Free Space: The Great War, they began working on the much easier to say Free Space 2. This game came out in 1999, a month before the announced date, as amazing then as it would be today. And while nothing in the sequel was radically different from the original, everything had been refined and perfected until the end result was considered by many to be the finest space sim ever made. The depth of gameplay, the intensity of combat, and the leap forward in design all added up to something truly spectacular. So, Free Space 2 was an anticipated sequel to a successful game that was better in every way. Therefore, it sold less. Wait, what? There were a number of reasons for the surprise. First of all, Free Space 2 released right alongside Outrage Entertainment's Descent 3, and having the two franchises competing didn't help anybody. Second, publisher Interplay did not market the title very aggressively. It's probably no coincidence that Interplay's financial state began its long decay right around this time. Third, while the game supported the keyboard and mouse, it was built first and foremost as a joystick game. Trouble was, by 1999, very few gamers still owned a joystick. Real-time strategy and first-person shooter games had cemented the keyboard and mouse as the tools of the trade. Not too hard to do since they came with every computer anyway. Why bother to go out and buy a joystick on top of them? It made Free Space 2 an odd creation, something Volition were creatively proud of, but commercially disappointed by. They still wanted to support it with expansion packs, but Interplay ordered them to stop. In the meantime, Volition needed to get a new contract as soon as possible, since their profit margin had been slimmer than expected. Volition had been talking to Interplay about publishing their next game, the role-playing game Summoner. However, with Interplay collapsing, they didn't seem like the best partner anymore. They chose to shop the game around to other potential publishers and see who was interested. As it turned out, console publisher THQ was looking to get into the PC space and thought Summoner would be a great entryway into that market. The deal was signed, and Summoner swung into full production. But just after signing the deal, THQ decided that, in fact, it didn't want to enter the PC market, at least not with Summoner. Rather, they wanted to bring Summoner into the console space. The Sony PlayStation 2 would be arriving shortly on American shores, and THQ wanted to have a game for it at launch. They chose Summoner to be their flag bearer. It was a difficult transition for the Volition team, who were comfortable with both PC programming and PC gamers. The PS2 would be a whole new animal.
It was exceptionally difficult for us to make the transition from PC to console. There's a lot of differences there at a technical level. The consumer's different. There's a difference between a television and a monitor. All the stuff that we had to learn at the same time as making a launch title, which is always extremely difficult because the documentation is inadequate. It's half of it's written in Japanese. So that was a extreme challenge for us.
Despite all of that, development went fairly well. The game had the distinction of being the first American PS2 game ever shown to the press. And for their part, THQ was nothing but happy with Volition's work. Eventually, founder Mike Koulis realized that there was an opportunity there. They were stressing out a lot about where their next contract would come from, and if they had the capital to survive if they didn't get one for a while. All that stress meant that Koulis himself wasn't involved with the games anymore. He would rather somebody else deal with the boring stuff so he could get back to making games.
I thought by selling the company, a lot of the legal and financial stuff would go away. And the other reason, frankly, was budgets were going up fast. Our first game, Descent, was around $400,000. Summoner and Red Faction were in the few $1 million range, and now we're like 10 times that. So just looking at where that graph was going to wind up, and frankly, I had no idea. I would not have predicted that it would get to where it is today. It was sort of the fear of budgets going up that rapidly and maybe being just one very poorly selling game away from, all that we had built up, coming to nothing.
So on August 31st, 2000, Koulis sold the company to THQ. While this solved a whole host of problems, including financial security, it also came with a major setback. Interplay owned the rights to both Descent and Free Space, a problem considering Volition had a team working on Descent 4, and they wanted to get back to work on Free Space 3. But Interplay didn't want to share with THQ. Volition was forced to bid farewell to the franchises that had put them on the map in the first place. Years later, in a last gift to fans, Volition released the engine source code for Free Space 2, allowing its devoted community to play with the game in any way they wanted. Then in October 2000, right alongside the American debut of the PlayStation 2, Summoner released. It was a sprawling fantasy RPG with a heavy emphasis on story. The combat was a mix of real-time and turn-based, and put the player in control of only one party member at a time. Unfortunately, at the time, the only way to get story across was through massive amounts of text. And while this might have worked fine as a PC title, it didn't translate too well onto consoles. On top of that, it wasn't always obvious what the player was supposed to actually do. As a result, the reviews were only lukewarm, and stated that the game had some good ideas that never really coalesced into a single great experience. Accordingly, the game sold modestly. Not as much as they would have hoped, but not terrible either. In the meantime, the Descent 4 team was finishing off their new project. They had taken some of the code and tools and started making a completely different game, a first-person shooter. Some on the team weren't too happy about this. They would rather be making flight games with full 6-axis controls than yet another FPS.
It was fairly gradual. It started as a guy in a jetpack, so it was a flying game, and there were a lot of difficulties with that, and it just gradually turned. It wasn't planned initially, but it pretty much turned into a traditional first-person shooter in terms of gameplay plus the destruction element.
At the time, the general feeling was that Summoner was the company's big game, and the shooter was just a sideshow. As it turned out, while Summoner underperformed, Red Faction became Volition's new flagship franchise when it released for the PlayStation 2 in May 2001. The game was one of the first shooters to succeed on a console, making full use of the dual analog sticks popularized by Sony's new controller. Taking place on a Martian mining colony, the game once again showcased the studio's tech-oriented focus by pioneering fully destructible environments. Anything in the game could be destroyed, so if a player needed to get out of a room, he could just blow a hole in the wall and get out. This proprietary geomod engine made for both innovative combat and unique puzzles. To Volition's own surprise, the game became a hit by selling over 2 million copies. It was considered one of the best shooters available on the PS2, if not the best, and was a major precursor to the Halo revolution that brought the genre to consoles for good. The company was on a roll, and with the financial backing of a major publisher behind them, it seemed like they could do anything they wanted. But before they hit their next big successes, they'd have to survive a number of failed projects and disappointments. Tune in next time to see Volition go wild.